Now entering Nerdist.com.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, Episode 31, Who Mourns for Adonais?
Welcome into Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Kneel before us, and we will promise you a lifetime of serenity, peace, and happiness.
But defy us, and you will be punished. I'm John Champion.
And I'm Ken Ray. Each week what we do on Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, is watch one episode of Star Trek and trying to suss out the messages, morals, and meanings from that episode. This week the question, what of Lazarus? No, I'm sorry.
No, please, no.
Who mourns for Adonais?
This is the episode where the Enterprise crew gets to confront a Greek god. You don't do that every day.
Yeah, well, they choose to confront a Greek god. You say get to. It's not like we're all dying to do that. That's not like my goal in life.
No?
Yeah, there's plenty of other stuff to confront. I'm not waiting around for... I want the Norse gods, actually. Thor.
Oh,
that's who I want to confront. Just because, seriously, thunder, all it does is scare people. Come on, dude. Get with the times.
Right.
You know what this episode reminded me of, actually?
What's that?
Have you read Douglas Adams' Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul?
No, I have not.
You see, I remember really liking it, but it's been a very long time since I've read it. But there is this fantastic thing going on the whole time with Thor. Mm-hmm. Thor basically is not ready to give up being a god. And so,
well, who would be?
The rest of Asgard. Actually,
wow.
that's part of the whole thing. In fact, I think if memory serves, and it's seriously been over 20 years since I read the book, but if memory serves, the rest of Asgard actually wants to sell Valhalla to developers, and Thor doesn't want to do it. So he keeps going around doing god stuff, and he keeps being punished by Odin. He has to carry around a Coke machine. for years,
great.
And he has to count all of the pebbles on the Norwegian beaches. Is it Norway? I can't remember. He has to count all the pebbles on some beach.
Yeah, and
he tells a guy this, and he says, "I was forced to count all the pebbles on this beach. Don't you want to know how many pebbles there are on this beach?" And the guy says, "Okay, how many?" And Thor says, "Count them yourself. I didn't do it for you."
I love it.
Yeah, a nice bit of levity for that. But that's me and me doing personal trivia, John. I know you've actually got Star Trek trivia for us today.
Oh wait, is it time? It's time for Star Trek trivia.
Might as well.
All right.
Be. Yeah.
Cool. I've got a little bit here for you. By the way, before we get into the show specific trivia, did you notice that we have a new opening theme in this episode?
We actually had that last week when we did Amok Time.
Oh, that's right.
And we and I want to say, what's his name? DeForest Kelley actually graduated this year.
Yes, he did. We're very glad to see his name in the credits.
Yeah, in the opening credits, because he was always at the end credits, but...
Right.
Yeah, he's moved on up a bit. I know, it's been like a week.
Nudge, I know. Well, we didn't get to mention
wink,
it.
Since we did Amok Time. Yes, I know. It's only been a week, though. I can't believe you already... Nudge. Anyway.
Yeah, I get it. but we didn't mention it last week. So yeah, here we are in season 2, and we've got new music. Yay!
Music. And new opening credits. Go. But trivia. So show specific trivia though. Hit me with your best trivia.
Okay, so here's the thing. First of all, the opening, or I should say the title of this episode, Who Mourns for Adonais, or Adonais, depending on how you pronounce it. I never knew how to pronounce the title of this episode.
You weren't an Amy Grant fan when you were a kid, were you?
No, I guess not.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, the song El Shaddai.
Oh, okay.
Oddly enough, Adonai rhymes with El Shaddai. One of the reasons that song might have been in there.
Oh, very interesting.
Or that name. Go ahead, anyway.
Well, and here's the thing. I find this episode title misspelled and miswritten all over the place.
Yeah.
Even in iTunes. I think it finally got corrected, but it was miswritten. Now, it's a good thing that Adonai is not a character in this episode. So we just kind of have to deal with the title and then we get it out of the way. The title refers to a line in a Percy Shelley poem. It was actually an elegy written for his friend John Keats. Written in 1821, just literally weeks after Keats died, Shelley sat down to write this elegy about his dear friend. And there was a line in there, who mourns for Adonai? Now, Adonai can refer to Adonis. It could be that character from Greek mythology, or here, more likely, it refers to, it is kind of wonky, so bear with me, an English translation of a plural reference to the Hebrew name for God. So what we end up with is essentially saying, who mourns for gods? Mm-hmm. You know, when the gods are gone, who's left to mourn for them? How do we mourn for them? So that's where the title comes from. And I had seen this title written, you know, throughout my life, and I had no idea, A, how to pronounce it, and B, what it meant. So now, in doing research for the show, I get to unburden myself of that confusion.
It's so interesting to me, though, that you put that in trivia, because unbeknownst to you, we're coming back to that later in the show.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, and sorry, maybe I should let you know what I want to talk about sometime.
No, the show's much more fun.
I think you're right.
No idea what we're doing.
I think you're absolutely right about that. It's like when you pull out your Mussolini apologies. I'm like, wow, I did not see that coming. Well, now I'm starting to see them coming. But the first, 4 or 5 times you did that.
Right.
Send your letters to John Champion. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted your thing.
No, that's fine. That's fine. That's what we do here. It's a give and take. The other little bit of trivia here worth mentioning is that Lieutenant Palamas was originally written to have been impregnated by Apollo. And yeah, I'm kind of glad they didn't go that route.
Wow. I want to read that novel.
Well, oddly enough, it is in the novelization.
Is it really?
James Blish, yes, it is. It is. When James Blish did the novelizations years after Star Trek was on the air, they included that plot line.
Well, okay. Forgive me. I guess I should have said a little bit more. I want to read the novel. Like maybe we do, go back to The Guardian of Forever, where we jump into that timeline, but then let them go ahead and live their lives, because I'm curious about that thing. Do you think his godlike powers would have actually been diluted quite a bit? Because Apollo was the child of Zeus and Leto, a human. Yeah. And so I mean, you're getting them like quarter god by the time you get to Apollo and Carolyn's.
Well, you've diluted the godlike powers, and remember, we don't have a source of power for that god anymore. He's got to have a mechanism.
If we're going to retcon, though, we go ahead and leave the power source there and see what happens.
All right.
Touch the stump before heading planetside. It's showtime for Apollo.
Prologue. We're approaching Pollux 4, and it looks like there is just no life in this area at all. Kind of boring, actually. The fetching Lieutenant Carolyn Palamas tells us exactly how boring it is. But Scotty sees this as perhaps an opportune moment to suggest they scurry off for a cup of coffee. It's kind of cute how Scotty is getting all flustered. But before you can say harassment, a giant hand appears in space. Well, it's an energy field that looks like a giant hand, and it grabs the Enterprise. Act 1. That big old hand has a big old face to go with it. On the view screen, there's now he kind of looks like a guy right out of Greek mythology, what with that laurel wreath and everything. He seems pretty friendly. Welcome, Earthlings. Good job getting into space and all. Your journey is over. Now you can just come hang out with me on my planet. Tempting as it is, and it's not, Kirk is ready to turn around. The hand still has the Enterprise in its grip, though, and when Sulu tries to work some fancy maneuvers, the hand just tightens its grip. Kirk agrees to come down to the planet with a landing party if it will stop the hand from crushing the ship. On the surface, Kirk, Scotty, McCoy, Chekhov, and remember Lieutenant Palamas? Well, she's here too because she studied Earth antiquity. They finally meet the man behind the threats and that lovely laurel wreath. His name? Apollo. And we're not talking about that guy from Battlestar Galactica or the guy from Rocky. Act 2. Apollo is very familiar with Earth from 5,000 years ago, along with the rest of his family, Zeus, Hera, Athena. You may have heard of them, the ones from Olympus. So guess what? Now that you've found them, it's time to put down the spaceship and get to the worshipping. That's right. Everyone on board the Enterprise is to come down and take up a new vocation of worshipping Apollo. Kirk, suspicious of the whole idea of claiming to be a god, is not so ready to give up and bow to Apollo. But Apollo makes a pretty strong case. Either start worshipping or he'll start wielding more of his power. He's already melted Chekhov's phaser, and he zapped Scotty's trigger finger when he got mouthy, especially about Lieutenant Palamas, because, you know, he likes to have coffee with her. Apollo is laying on the seduction pretty thick. He's buttering up Lieutenant Palamas. Well, okay, now they're on a first-name basis, Carolyn, with talk of being a goddess. He even whips up a new, more revealing outfit for her to wear. By the way, back on the Enterprise, Spock is holding things together really well. He's got Uhura working on communications and Sulu at work trying to figure out just where all that power is coming from that's feeding Apollo's abilities. Act 3. Carolyn is getting to know Apollo now. He explains that he and his race left Earth when the humans stopped worshipping them, and ultimately all but he disappeared. I guess they really thrive on the whole worshipping thing, but really, who doesn't? Carolyn is really eating up the whole idea of being a god's girlfriend by now. Back at the landing party, Scotty is getting a little peeved again. He'd like the opportunity to go have coffee with Carolyn again, probably when this is all over. Apollo stops Scotty in his tracks when he attacks with a gold statue and sends the engineer to the ground with more of his god power. The Enterprise and the landing party are coming to the same conclusions about Apollo. He's getting his energy from somewhere, if only they could find it. Kirk's got a new plan now. Since Apollo seems to need his energy, and he gets tired when he uses too much, they'll split up and just really, really annoy him. Apollo takes the bait, but Carolyn steps in and messes up the whole thing by begging for mercy. Act 4. Carolyn has really got it bad for Apollo now. She's riding the high of making goddess plans. Settle down on Olympus, raise a bunch of little demigods. Kirk starts laying the smack down. He says that Carolyn needs to reject Apollo in order to free the rest of the crew. You ready for a Kirk speech? Well, I sure am. A lifetime of worship is no life at all. He makes a plea for Carolyn to remember her human roots, that they are the same in an unbreakable tie with the rest of the human race. We're all just a little bit of flesh and blood, and to quote Kirk, in a universe without end, the only thing that is truly yours is the rest of humanity. She reluctantly agrees, and just in time, Kirk has communication again with the Enterprise. Spock can break through just enough and explains that he can aim a phaser at Apollo's temple, which seems to be the source of his power. Kirk says, yeah, let's do this, even if it means we're in harm's way, and even if we don't know the effect that will have on Carolyn or Apollo when they pull their vanishing trick into thin air. Carolyn is just starting to have the talk with Apollo. You know, the talk. It's the one that always begins with, honey, we need to talk. She's starting to make a case for her own identity and humanity. She breaks it down that she's only been studying Apollo as a new species. When he starts to get demanding, she finds it a little easier to spurn him for good. Now Apollo is really using up some of that energy to create a storm. Spock calls to confirm with the captain that yes, the temple is where Apollo's power is coming from. Good timing. Apollo is just angry and distracted enough that a couple of phaser blasts knock out the temple, thus leaving Apollo powerless. Apollo, devastated that he has lost any chance of keeping the Enterprise crew as worshippers, asks if what he wanted was too much. Kirk replies, "We've outgrown you. You ask for something we can no longer give." Apollo then casts himself onto the winds of the universe. He calls upon his family and weeps that there's no room for gods, and he disappears into the ether. McCoy has a bit of remorse. Kirk agrees that the contribution of those gods, millennia ago, made them who they were.
I think we know who mourns for Adonais. There are two things really quickly that have absolutely nothing to do with the show, but in the just sort of fun thing.
Bring it.
He taps that energy. And I couldn't think that's right after he took Carolyn, and I couldn't help thinking, well, that's, kind of dirty. I was also a little surprised that in trying to get away from the big giant hand, Kirk suggests that Sulu rock the ship because there is a big giant hand, and if the ships are rocking, that big giant hand might start knocking because there's no sign indicating that that's not what they should do if the ship is rocking.
Right.
So it's really, this whole episode could have ended in the prologue, or prologue, or right after.
Yeah.
In Act 1, that could have been it.
Very true. Yeah. Maybe they'll put up a sign now.
Well, I think no, luckily, maybe, I mean, as 5,000 years ago, Apollo hadn't heard the whole, if the ship's a rockin' thing.
Oh, I bet they had that 5,000 years ago.
Yes, that's true. They did have wind in their sails.
They did.
Yeah.
Hey, some cool things that I thought about while watching this episode. So in that prologue, when Carolyn is just so bored with the idea that there's nothing out there, I love how Star Trek is saying very specifically that the galaxy is just teeming with life.
Yeah.
You know, going back to like the Drake equation, I don't know if it had been developed specifically at that time, but they're just saying life is not only likely and possible, life is just everywhere. And it's boring when you don't find it.
It's also interesting that we have, in fact, come across enough sort of uber beings at this point.
Right.
That when Bones is doing his assessment of Apollo later, he says, well, he looks human, but that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Well, at this point, it's true. I mean, from Trelane to the Metrons, really, just because a guy looks like a guy, he might not be a guy, he might not be a girl, heck, he might not even be.
Right.
Yeah.
Also wanted to point out that Chekhov is predating the Dorothy Hamill haircut by at least a decade.
It is kind of nice, isn't
but
it?
he's rocking it. He's rocking it very hard.
Chekhov's great in this episode.
He is. He's got a lot of good back and forth with Kirk.
Yeah, it's fun. I had heard a long time ago that Chekhov was supposed to be an answer to Davy Jones. True or untrue?
There's the whole apocryphal story about how the Russians said, why don't you have a Russian on the spaceship? And there's no real evidence that anybody in the Soviet Union in the 60s had Star Trek.
Right.
So that's totally apocryphal. But we did definitely have the monkeys on the air, and we did definitely have the wildly popular Davy Jones.
Yeah.
So let's inject the show with a little of that youth appeal, and done very well with Chekhov.
It is. It's cute.
It is.
It is cute. I mean, there are episodes coming up where it gets annoying.
Right.
But this episode it's cute. I was like, oh, that, and it wasn't forced comedy. It was just like, oh, that's cute.
I tell you what else is cute, that one day Apollo is going to be a great fashion designer. It's kind of unfortunate that he just evaporated into the universe, because the man had some skills.
Well, you say he evaporated into the universe, but we don't really know what happens to him. I mean, he called upon Zeus to accept them, so, they went someplace.
Right. Well, he kind of describes that point of no return, even for a god, and the Hera had just sort of, become non-corporeal.
Yeah, well, as far as he knows, though.
Yeah, well, true.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's possible that when he said, Zeus, accept me, that Zeus took him to the big fashion house in the sky.
Oh, that would be great. They should have their own show. What I'm saying is that the outfit that actually costume designer Bill Tice designed for Carolyn Palamas, Lieutenant Palamas here, is gorgeous. Yeah. And it's right up there with Sherry Jackson in What a Little Girl's Made Of.
He makes some pretty goofy stuff for men.
Yeah.
He does okay with the ladies.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
He does.
From a heterosexual male's point of view. I mean, and if you want to argue about that, write to somebody.
Right. Hey, you know who else does a really good job? Spock.
Yeah.
Because, we've seen Spock up until now kind of being a little touch and go with his command skills, but now he is in command.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to watch.
It is really cool to watch. There was also there was a wonderful thing that happened between Spock and Uhura as well. His assessment of her abilities here. Mm-hmm. We tell kids all the time that they can, they're the best and they can do anything, but we all know they can't. Right. A lot of times we tell that to 5-year-olds. They really can't do everything. I mean, they're 5. Maybe they will be able to one day, but as it stands right then. Yeah,
you don't want a 5-year-old to do your taxes.
No, you don't.
Trust me, I know. Yeah.
Put your mind to it, and you really can't do everything, but you'll be okay. What's really cool, though, is Uhura is actually working on bypassing the communications thing to try to, contact the people down on the planet, which is being stopped by the big green hand and Apollo. Mm-hmm. She says it's been a while since she's done it, and Spock's like, come on, time's important. And she's like, no, seriously, it's been years. And Spock says that he can think of no one better for the task than her. And what's cool is it's true because Spock is saying it.
Yes.
You know, and it's kind of neat to see him recognize her ability and actually sort of elevate her status in a way that even her rank and her position on the bridge of the Enterprise don't do. You know, I mean, because he's always very logical, and he's not given to flowery speech. I mean, aside from his occasional poetry about winking out of things, he's not given to flowery speech. And so, you know, for him to say, no, seriously, there's nobody who could do this better than you. That's like the truest testament to Uhura's place in Star Trek that we've seen so far, it seems to me.
A healthy dose of sexism, and telling God he's fired. I feel certain there will be nothing that offends anyone in this episode.
You know what Star Trek is rife with, John?
What's that?
Racism and sexism.
Oh, no. Oh, ouch.
Not really racism. It's not even really racist. It's just kind of a thing. Okay. I found it kind of interesting that Apollo seems to be exhibiting a tiny bit of racism when they're talking about who's going to go down to, planet Pollux 4.
Yeah.
And, he's looking at everybody on the bridge and says, don't bring the one with the pointed ears. He reminds me too much of Pan, and Pan always bored me. Well, way to judge a book by your cover, dude, because Pan was this, playful, lustful, dare I say, puckish god or, demigod or alien or whatever. Which would make him about as much like Spock as I am like Burt Reynolds back in the day.
Now, wait a minute, Ken, I've met you, and I think of you very much like Burt Reynolds.
Well, if you're talking about the 70-something-year-old Burt Reynolds that we have today, yeah. I'm talking about the longest yard, Smokey and the Bandit. I'm nothing like that Burt Reynolds. So,
okay.
Yeah, right. So there's very different, as, there's a huge difference between Spock and Pan. But they do have the ears in common. That's about it.
You know what? My interpretation of that was actually a little bit different. When he had that line, I thought the same thing. I thought, oh, wait a minute, Pan is playful. Pan is not like Spock at all. But I kind of thought that Apollo saw that Spock was an alien, may have had some knowledge of this crew. I don't know. It's hard to say. That's all speculation.
Oh, my goodness. Are you saying that Pan was a Vulcan?
No. I'm saying.
Oh, come on. Come on. Let's go ahead and play that. Do it just for a second. Come on. They were a group of aliens. They were a group of aliens that were traveling. They were a group of spacefarers that were traveling the galaxy. They found Earth 5,000 years ago. Who's to say they didn't find Vulcan first? And who's to say they didn't pick up a Vulcan and bring him with them just for fun? Except apparently Apollo didn't think it was that much fun. The end.
Yeah, except that would be a really boring Pan. It would just be like logical Pan.
He could also have been a Romulan. Or 5,000 years ago, it's possible that the Romulans and the Vulcans had not yet split. And so you still had this, crazy sort of, fairly logical, but also, kind of hot under the collar.
I like that. All right, I like that.
We're retconning. It's a retconning episode.
It is. Now, my thought was this, that Apollo assessed who was on the bridge, and he said, the alien I'm not too sure about. Better to keep him at a safe distance, but I'm going to bring down some humans because I know how to deal with humans.
That's a good point. Okay.
That was just me. But I
still like my idea that Pan's actually a, Romulan like Vulcan, but whatever.
I think we should go back through Greek mythology and just figure out what Star Trek species all of those characters came from.
That's a fun idea.
Not really, not at all.
The sexism thing, though, is actually more serious in this episode, I think, and that's kind of my shtick.
Yeah,
one of my shticks anyway. Scotty is hitting on Carolyn Palamas in a huge way. Bones isn't sure that he likes their relationship, and it's not because Scotty shouldn't be hitting on her, but because she probably isn't as into Scotty as Scotty is into Carolyn. But it's all cool as far as Bones is concerned because, she's a woman, all woman, and eventually what she's going to do is she's going to find a man, and she's going to leave Starfleet. And Kirk's like, yep. And that's pretty much it. And all of this is done right within earshot of Uhura. Now, there's no evidence that she's heard it, but, she's communications. She's probably listening.
Everything.
Yeah, she's probably paying attention to what's going on.
Yeah.
And dames, huh? Yeah. Yeah, she's cute, but she won't last because at some point she's going to meet a guy and we'll drop her off on some planet and she'll start making babies.
I cringed when that whole exchange was going down. And then the only thing that just kind of sort of in a tiny bit saved it was Kirk's last line, where he says, I don't like to think of it as losing an officer. I think of it as, well, wait, I'm losing an officer.
That's a good point.
Like that one moment, it doesn't justify everything that just happened 10 seconds before. Yeah. But at least Kirk comes back and he's like, no, this is an officer. That's what this is about.
So in Kirk-era Starfleet, women are valuable to the organization from, let's say, 22 to 29.
Okay.
They're good officers at that point. But, biological clock, blah, blah, blah. Eventually they're going to have to drop her off.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, it's not, again, this is one of those things. I mean, it's weird that I don't guess it's that weird that we keep talking about sexism because I'm usually the one who brings it up. It's just inherent. It's crazy how inherent it is. It's like, it's not even a topic of the show. Like we will come across shows, or we have come across shows where, ecology is an issue or racism is an issue. Sexism is very rarely an issue. It's just a thing. It's there,
Right. Well, and it's a different take on, you go back to The Cage and you look at number 1. Yeah. That is totally, you would never have that conversation about that character. What we do about Carolyn.
Well, and yet there is, if you go back to that, there is also a rankling from her that you don't have that conversation about her. When Pike says to number 1, I'm not used to having women on the bridge. Oh, well, it's different with you, number 1.
Yeah.
What with your, not being, except you. Anyway. Yeah. We also might want to talk briefly about the fact that there is not a single unattractive woman on the Enterprise. Mm-hmm. Apollo is taken with Carolyn, saying that she's more beautiful than Daphne or Cassandra. Now, Cassandra was a downer just by her very nature. So I understand, even if she's gorgeous, after a while, you're just going to be like, God, could you not? Right. Doesn't mean the sky is falling, Cassandra. Daphne, though, is a big deal. And if you know the story of Daphne and Apollo, and I'm not going to bore you with it, but if you know the story of Daphne and Apollo, for Apollo to say that Carolyn is more beautiful than Daphne is huge. Now, of course, it's also been about 5,000 years. Mm-hmm. So, maybe his memory's just a tiny bit off on that. What I'm wondering, though, is what if she had been played as a bookish, bespectacled, hunchbacked, pimply, receding hairline, 85-year-old woman?
I like where you're going with that.
There is not a single unattractive person on Kirk's Enterprise. Yeah. That's television, though. That's the thing.
Ken, maybe it's television. Maybe 300 years in the future, we're all just better looking.
Well, I guess that is, that is actually a possibility. That is honestly, you see? Mm-hmm. Wow, you're poking holes in all my sexist stuff. That's not bad.
It's like Lake Wobegon, where all the men are good looking and all the children are above average. That's the future.
And the women are strong, right?
And the women are strong.
Women are strong. The men are good looking, and the children are well above average. Yeah. Yes, that's right. Apollo is also a sexist, by the way, which is not surprising because he's practically oiled up, walking around. He's very much well. He's stereotypical in a number of ways, but his pronouncement that Carolyn is wise for a woman.
Ouch! Ouch! Yeah,
she's supposed to say thanks.
I know, right?
Or should she just poke him in the eye? All right, so there it is. That's the racism and the sexism.
Yeah, well, here we are again with this character, a female character who is a professional, who is an officer, and she just suddenly gets taken by the, oiled up muscle man of the week.
I'm actually okay with this, though, with her character in a way that I was not in Space Seed. And
really?
Well, yeah. Although maybe I have to be a little bit more forgiving in Space Seed, except that Apollo is not abusive to Carolyn in the way that Khan was to that character's name, who I cannot remember right now. MacGyver's, thank you very much. He's not abusive to her. That was the problem with MacGyver's. I understand MacGyver's being attracted to Khan because she's been studying men like him. It's like, it's what she's done her whole life is study men like him. And then suddenly there is a man like him. And so I would understand her immediately being attracted to that. I don't understand her sticking around once he starts abusing her. It's different with Apollo and Carolyn. Because, she has studied antiquity. She has studied Earth's history, and presumably other histories as well. But, she has studied the gods. And then when she meets a god, well, of course she's going to be turned on. And then, he proceeds to not hit her or not, not abuse her mentally or physically. And so, her staying turned on, I'm actually kind of, I get that.
Yeah, but he's also abusing her friends, though. And,
he can make new friends. Actually, he's a god. He can make her new friends.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So good. Really, it's going to be okay.
All right. I'll tell you why I was really intrigued by this episode.
Okay.
And that's that as we've been doing Star Trek, and we've done with season 1, just now into season 2, we've had all these kind of very interesting moral dilemmas and a few you see Timmy moments, and we've started to set up anyway this sort of framework for a humanist future. There's very little reference to God or religion. There's a few pieces here and there. We have the chapel on the ship, and sort of a multi-purpose chapel on the ship, it seems. And but here in this episode, we are taking on one of the big 3 topics that you do not discuss at a dinner party. You don't discuss sex, religion, or politics. And here we're taking on religion and God and gods and their place in our lives. And so my hat is off. Kudos to Star Trek for doing that at all, because it's sort of a bold thing to do on TV, and it's a bold thing to do on 60s TV on an action-adventure show. And what I thought was really interesting is the character of Apollo, the character of God. We have this thing here where if you look on the micro level, if you take everything in this episode at its surface and you say, well, this is about the Greek myths and the Greek gods and how we got those, and oh, look, maybe they were aliens that visited Earth. Isn't that fascinating? And now they're gone. But what I like to do is I kind of like to look at this from the macro level. Star Trek science fiction is set up as metaphor and stories about today and about ourselves. So to me, I like to look at this more as religion, the big topic here. And I thought the character of God that we're portraying shares traits with a lot of other gods. Apollo is loving but jealous. He is peaceful but demanding. He's benign but punitive. It's a mess. And it's a character that anyone who studies religion with a critical eye should recognize right away.
He actually, to me, is sort of Old Testament God from the Judeo-Christian tradition. It's interesting, though, Carolyn actually tries to bring him around to more sort of a new and improved Testament God,
right?
Interceding for them. Like Apollo, when they do the whole thing where they're laughing at him and they're taunting him and, trying to break his power.
Right.
He's about to kill somebody.
Yep.
Somebody is going to die. It's going to be Kirk, actually, because Kirk's the one who's sort of leading the charge.
Right.
And she intercedes and says, well, why are they going to worship you if you're going to be mean to them?
Yeah.
Be nice. Don't be mean. And this is that turning point between the Old Testament and the New Testament. We used to have this, angry God who was like, I don't like that town.
Kill them. Yeah, right.
Disobey me and I'll throw you out of Eden. And of course, we know that's the basis of Star Trek. Don't look back or I will turn you into a pillar of salt. I mean, he was a capricious dude.
Yeah.
And it's not until sort of the New Testament times, the coming of Jesus and the people who followed him, that we end up with sort of a loving God that we, and she tries to turn Apollo that way, which is fascinating.
Well, it lasts for a moment.
Yeah.
Only for a moment, long enough to save Kirk and everybody else. And she makes a good case, though. I mean, I think her logic that appeals to Apollo is just saying, well, look, if you kill these people, then who's going to be left to worship you? So I saw it more as a sort of a bargain of, look, what you want is people to worship you. You have to hang on to these people to worship you. And then,
see, I'm not sure. I mean, if you're going to take the whole thing as an examination of religion, then it seems to me that you are arguing for not giving God something for nothing. I mean, having created, having started, is not, it doesn't seem to be enough. Now, of course, in the end, nothing is actually enough as far as this episode is concerned to support the idea of God. Do you want to? I know we're a little bit into the conversation at this point, but do you want to talk about the line?
Yeah, why not? Because I think that's one of the big key things in this episode that I know. Seeing this sort of on our schedule that it was coming up, I really struggled with it.
Yeah.
This whole episode is about, Kirk fighting this being. It's Apollo saying, I'm a god, and Kirk saying, no, you're not. And it's also Kirk saying, we don't need you. We don't need to worship you. We don't need what you have to offer. We have outgrown you, and we've come a long way in 5,000 years. Now, there's one line where Kirk says, mankind has no need for gods. We find the one quite adequate. And the second half of that line, to me, not only is difficult to process, it undermines a lot else of what's going on in this episode.
If by a lot else you mean all of it?
All of it, yes. I mean everything in the episode.
It stands the chance of doing that. Now, my assumption, and you've actually done a little bit more work on this than I have, my assumption is it's 1960 Hessenfam. And, you're not going to get away. Go back to the title. This is what I was talking about earlier when I said we're going to hit that again. Who mourns for Adonais? The American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language defines Adonai as Lord, used in Judaism as a spoken substitute for the ineffable name of God. So the title of the episode is Who Mourns for the Lord, or Who Mourns for God.
Right.
And you can't do that in 1960 whatever on television. Even if you're going to spend 48 minutes or 50 minutes making a humanist case for not needing God, you just can't say we don't need God. If you say it in a way that most people aren't going to understand,
right?
Like the fact that you say, nearly 50 years later, it's misspelled and mispronounced all over the place. So in 1967 or 68, you're not, not everybody's going to go, they're saying who needs God?
Yeah.
But they weren't going to be allowed to say who needs God. And so my assumption is that when you add that second part of that line, we find the one adequate. What you're doing is sort of basically keeping, censors or keeping heads of network.
Yes.
Trying to keep the South, or trying to keep, not the South necessarily, but trying to keep, people who are not maybe in a place of being willing to even question whether or not there is a God or whether or not we need one.
Well, yeah, and that's just it. This episode is about confronting God, and we're doing it very boldly, and we're saying we've outgrown that relationship. And that's heavy stuff then, that's heavy stuff now. We're going to get letters,
Yeah.
No question about it. But you have that line in there that undermines everything else that has been built up by the episode, and undermines the ending of the episode as well. So we have to deal with it. And I thought, well, okay, I want to do a little more research on this, find what I can. And then I also wanted to get some other opinions. Now, there is some indication from Bob Justman that line was necessitated by NBC.
Okay.
So it was kind of shoehorned in.
Sure.
And I don't have the exact document. I hopefully one day that will come to light, but there is some indication from Bob Justman that that's what happened. Now, I heard from some very interesting people on this. I threw it out there to some kind of Trek experts, Trek friends. Curtis Webster, who actually ran a series in LA called The Spirit of Star Trek, which is about these kind of religious issues that come up. And he said that he had heard that story somewhere about that line being shoehorned in, but he couldn't recall exactly where. And he says, I'll just read exactly what he wrote here. I remember thinking even the first time I saw that episode that the line felt forced and unnatural. So I believe it to be absolutely true that NBC forced the line down Gene's throat, but I can't prove it. Now, he recommended that I talk to Richard Arnold. Richard Arnold was one of Gene Roddenberry's assistants, and he's kind of like Mr. Star Trek, an encyclopedic knowledge of the show. And he worked throughout the 80s and 90s in and around Star Trek production. And he just says flat out, obviously that was not Gene speaking. But it's one of those things that you see and hear in the original series, despite Gene's fighting against it. Network pressure, he's not so sure. So there is some question there. But I'll throw that out there now because we're going to come back to it in Bread and Circuses. And I'll have more for you there about kind of Gene fighting the network. And there's two other people that I talked to, Jeff Bond and Robert Meyer Burnett. Jeff Bond said that his understanding, again, this is sort of NBC pushing it down their throats. Rob Burnett had a kind of a different take on it. His interpretation was, well, after the Greek, the Roman, the Norse, the Asian, and all the other false gods disappeared, we were left with only one vestige of our misguided belief in God. So we really don't need to start acquiring any more. Thank you very much. So that's an interesting interpretation. I think just trying to fit in what's there, just trying to make it make sense with the rest of the episode. But I think a lot of kind of common opinion on this as well. This isn't Gene Roddenberry speaking. This isn't even necessarily the show speaking. This is something that got pushed in by somebody, whether from network pressure or just the production itself going, well, maybe we're pushing the line too far, and it got squeezed in.
Yeah, it feels like fear.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really, to me anyway, it feels like, somebody somewhere was uncomfortable with, the kind of backlash that this might generate.
Yeah.
Now, I will say, and that you're right, I don't know if we're going to get letters or if you were saying that as about, talking about the 1960s. I will say...
all of the above.
All right.
Yeah.
This is not an indictment of everything that religion has to offer. That, to me, is kind of the interesting thing. I mean, if we go back again to the title, Who Mourns for Adonais, the answer at the end of the episode, Kirk and Bones. Kirk and Bones both do. In the end, Kirk actually mourns for Adonais, or in this case, Apollo. Saying, maybe we could have given him something. Because they gave us, these particular aliens gave us, Greek culture, which is, of course, regarded the world over as the basis for civilization as we understand it, even, today in the beginning of the 21st century.
Right.
And so Kirk thinks, maybe they could have gone ahead and gotten him some laurels like he asked. But, not be his unquestioning servant forever. Just maybe, tip a hat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To decide that there's, no God, or decide that you don't even know whether there is a God, is not to spit in the face of the idea of God, or not to spit in the face of the idea of religion, or not to spit in the face of everything that's come before. I mean, there's a ton of good stuff that can be taken away from religion as we've understood it to this point. And Kirk seems to sort of be acknowledging that too.
I agree with you, but I think the bigger point here is that the relationship between man and religion, mankind and religion, has now changed.
Let's go down to brass tacks. Jesus.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And whether you think Jesus was the one true Son of God or not, most people can agree that Jesus was pretty groovy. I know Jews who think that Jesus was kind of cool. And certainly we have heard over the past, in the years since 9/11, we've heard, plenty of Muslims say, I got no problem with Christianity. It's not my God, or it's not the way I think about it, because actually it is the same, overarching God. But, Jesus seems like a cool dude. Not the one that I follow, but that's cool. And you'll hear Christians say the same thing about other religions as well. I read the Bhagavad Gita, as I'm sure a lot of us did when we were in college, mostly because it was required, or high school, mostly because it was required. And while it's been a very long time, I remember finding a lot of it compelling. There was a lot of it that made an incredible amount of sense to me, right up to the point where they started pitching hard for Krishna.
Yeah.
This is not to say there's no value in any of it.
Oh, no, and I don't... Yeah, I agree with you.
I want to take pains to say that, though, because I know that there are people... My mom still goes to church, and good. I'm glad my mom goes to church. I'm glad she finds what she wants to find there. That does not seem to be where most of Star Trek is, despite this one line, despite the one Kirk line.
Sure.
All right, that's it.
Okay.
That just because I don't want. I know how people get about this. I know how I used to get about this because I used to be one of those people.
Yeah.
You say anything sort of against or even questioning, and sometimes people get angry. Sometimes people get frightened. But it's not to say that there's no good from any of it.
Well, and that's what's so cool about this episode is that it does question, it does challenge, and people can feel threatened and angry and challenged by it, or inspired by it. However it is that you want to feel about it, that's fine. But I think what's so interesting here is that, I agree with you. We're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater necessarily. That ending scene of Kirk and McCoy mourning for Adonais, mourning for Apollo, is more important and more powerful than the line, "We find the one God quite adequate." Because they are acknowledging that there's a value in the whatever the good parts of that religion were. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
I wonder what the one God is that he's talking about.
Who knows?
and Bingo was his name. There's really no telling in the next 300 years, which maybe it's none of the ones that we know about today.
Maybe. But the line has to be addressed because it is so out of place. And it does kind of hurt the episode.
Oh, it screws up the canon.
How would it screw up canon?
Well, I shouldn't say it screws up canon. I apologize. It screws up... You and I were in Vegas, and that already sort of goes a long way to disproving God. You and I were in Vegas, and somebody wanted to argue with you about something that we had talked about fairly early on. It was the very first episode. It was the cage, actually, where I said, the whole thing about hell being a fable that you heard in childhood.
A legend from Earth's past.
A legend from Earth's past. Thank you very much. And the gentleman wanted to come up and argue with you about whether or not we had given up religion in Star Trek based on this line.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I shouldn't say it screws up canon because I'm using that term incorrectly. It screws up Star Trek.
Right.
At least for people who want to give the line credence.
Yeah.
It seems to me. And so I guess the question is, do you give the line credence? And you've already said no, and I think I go along with you on that.
Let's just put it this way. That line would have been more powerful if it stopped with the first phrase.
Yes.
I
agree. Yeah. And next week, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin?
Hey, let's kind of move the conversation a little bit here because I think that we've explored the idea of this episode, taking on religion, taking on God, making this sort of bold statement. But there's another bold statement here that I really like that is not just about the negative act of sort of dismantling God and religion, but something that is a positive act, and that is sort of building up a humanist, for lack of a better word, point of view. And that's in Kirk's speech to Lieutenant Palamas. It comes across as incredibly humanistic, where Kirk is pleading with her, saying, hold my hand. Look, this is all we have. This is all we know in this vast universe, is that you and I are human. We share that bond, and you share that bond with everybody else on the Enterprise and everybody else that you've encountered as human beings. So don't, first of all, he's pleading, don't sell us out. That's the obvious sort of self-preservation part of it. And it does come across, dare I say, a little carbon chauvinistic. but the intent to me is quite beautiful. This humanist idea that this is all we've got. We can't rely on the promise of something sort of ethereal, the promise of something, I'll make you a god, you'll live on Mount Olympus. No. The only promise we have is what we've got, and we have to make the best of it. So it's a little wonky. It's a little strange because he is pleading with her just solely based on her biological makeup. But like I said, I think the intent is really nice. So that part really spoke to me.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And honestly, there is one thing that happens here that a lot of times it sort of gets under my skin, but I'm even okay with it this time. Kirk destroys Apollo's way of life. Yeah. Now, there's a weird sort of like where he's a god, he's not a god, and there's the whole Arthur C. Clarke thing. Which I've got written down and I cannot remember it, and it shames me every time I cannot remember how it goes exactly.
I'm here for you, Ken. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Okay, now you see, I always have that idea in my head, but do you actually know those words by heart? Can you say it? Can you say it properly when you're trying to say it to people, or do you just always go, "Yeah, you know that thing that Clark said about magic"?
No. I for some reason the flow of those words, sufficiently advanced technology, stick with me. Yeah.
Good for you. You're much better at that than I am then. But okay, so here's the thing. There's kind of a weird thing going on with Apollo because so he's apparently got this extra organ in his body that lets him draw power from the temple that he has built. So the temple is the power source. He's got this thing in his heart. They destroy that temple. And yet he's still able to communicate with Zeus and get, swept up into whatever the thing is. Mm-hmm. That's just that's kind of weird to me.
It is a little it's a lot odd, and
we're dealing with something here that's still. I mean, that's the thing. We're dealing with something here. It seems to me that's still kind of magical, in a way, because this technology now has been destroyed, hasn't it?
Yeah. His technology is gone, kind of like Trelane. Okay, Trelane's technology got taken away from him, but you still have Trelane's parents who have their own technology, who have their own power, whatever that may be. So when Zeus comes back to take Apollo away, they're using whatever other thing they have. Apollo just had his setup in the temple.
I apologize. I feel like I sidetracked this there. It was just kind of an odd, there's still there's still something not quite divine. But, something a little bit divine, even at the end of the whole, you're not divine. Hey, where'd you go?
Well, that's another thing we don't understand. And again, it's sort of the problem here that, like the end of a lot of episodes of Star Trek, we get to the end, we've discovered something, but we can't stick around long enough to figure out what that thing is.
I remember where I was going. I apologize. He ended him. Generally speaking, when they just decide to end somebody, it kind of makes me sad. Or when they decide to end somebody's way of life, it kind of makes me sad. I'm okay with ending Apollo, or at least ending the way Apollo was doing what he was doing, because what he was doing was, I'm going to destroy your ship and you're going to stay here forever and worship me. That tends to be a thing when they like decide, okay, well, he's got to die, or, their way of life has to change. It feels to me like Kirk makes that decision a lot of times without really taking a lot into account.
Yeah.
I'm actually okay with, and I guess, here come the letters again. I'm actually okay with killing Apollo. Or at the very least imprisoning him, putting lightning in a bottle and just saying, we're done. We do not need this. Do not open.
Well, it seemed like the only alternative. And I agree with you, because it is sort of a case of, hey, maybe we could get along with Apollo. Maybe Apollo's a good guy once you take away his desire to force people into servitude.
Yeah.
and use power to do it.
Yeah, but take that away, and what has he got?
He's got really nice hair and a really nice laurel wreath crown.
Decades ago, Jim Kirk did away with a 5,000-year-old god. Decades later, does the story of the Enterprise and Apollo stand the test of time?
All right, everybody, we've reached the point in the show where we get to assess the damage. We get to pick it apart and decide, does the show hold up, and do the messages hold up, and just what are we trying to say here? So, Ken, I present it to you. Does this episode, as a production, as a TV show, hold up?
The hand looks a little goofy. And I know that's probably even a remastered, better hand than it was. I don't know for certain. I'm assuming it looks better than it did, but it still looks a little weird.
By the way, I don't want to sidetrack you too much. It is a remastered hand. It is new. There is a rumor, unsubstantiated, that's why I didn't put it in trivia, that was Gene Roddenberry's hand originally. But it is only a rumor. So,
all right. Well,
yeah, take that as you will.
If that's the worst you have to say about the show, well, that and the sexism. But the sexism, I mean, at this point, it's so common in the original series at this point that we have to go ahead and kind of accept it. We can go ahead and keep pointing it out, to say good thing that we're not quite like that anymore, or hopefully we're not quite like that anymore.
Right.
But if the two worst things you have to say about it are this one thing that has sort of been a flaw all the way through the series and, the kind of goofiness of the big giant hand, then I would say, yeah, it works. I mean, is it dated? Yeah, we might present gods a bit differently. We might even present Greek gods a bit differently if we were doing the show today. Then again, I think about the powers that be in Joss Whedon's Angel, which was made, I want to say, 99, 2000, somewhere around there. And they're still sort of presented that way. So, I mean, it's a classic presentation. Maybe he wouldn't be in Gold LeMay if you did it today, but maybe he would be. Who knows?
Yeah.
I think it stands up very well.
I kind of agree. I think it stands up as a story. I think it stands up as a concept. Like I said, I just love the fact that we are doing something this bold, this challenging on TV in the 1960s. It's challenging stuff today. So I love all of that. Now, as a production, I think it's not really Star Trek's finest moment. I think we're trapped on this set that looks very phony. I think the lighting, everything, it just kind of doesn't hold up. In the remaster, fortunately, when Apollo gets really big, we cut out the matte lines that were so bad in the original. So, the effects, stuff like that, just don't hold up. The sexism doesn't hold up. But I'm conditionally saying that it does hold up because the writing is good, with the exception of that one line.
You see, I'm willing to. Well, you see, the one line does run the risk of derailing the whole episode, as far as I'm concerned. But I think we just have to go ahead and accept that was put in by people who, weren't of the body, if you know what I mean.
Right.
I will say the being on the one set doesn't bother me. And you and I have sort of debated this before. Going back to Trelane, you didn't like the courtroom set because it seemed very sparse, and it was just sort of like, Kirk against a dark background. To me, I actually liked that particular set because, I mean, and the noose was hanging in the background as far where Kirk was too, or the shadow of the noose was there. Very minimalist, and really sort of said, this is all there is right now. Kirk's life is in the balance.
Right.
I sort of feel the same way about the set here. Now, I don't think the set was stylized, and it's quite possible that the only reason that we have the set being what the set is because, we got $80, guys, so don't blow it.
Right.
But, I mean, to put them in one place where they really can only do one thing and trying to sort of get themselves out of that situation, it seems to me that you could easily see that as a parallel or a parable, for what the whole episode's about. Yeah, this is the one thing. We're supposed to do this. We're supposed to worship this thing, and that's going to get us through, and then everything's going to be fine. They're trapped in that one, that one box. Right. They're trapped on that one set. So, I mean, this is not like Shore Leave where you need to run to this place, you need to run to that place, you need to run to this other place. I mean, there's one issue here, and they need to deal with this one issue and either accept it or get over it. There's never going to be any other place to go if they decide that they're just going to stick with what Apollo says.
I like your argument. I still disagree.
Right.
I mean, only because, like I said, it just felt phony and kind of claustrophobic. Like there was a lot of, I'm God, you're going to worship me. No, you're not. Let's get off this set. So that's the only thing that kind of felt bad to me about the episode. But this show lives on its writing, and its writing is really good. So speaking of the writing, what do we have here for the message?
Are you kidding me?
Well, I want to hear you go, and then I'll give you my version.
You want to hear me go because you want me to get the letters.
No. I'll take letters.
Well, I mean,
no,
we've actually already said it, right? I mean, there is no. Yeah. I mean, if you want to sum the whole thing up, it is Really, you're going to make me say it. We don't need the ideas that have sort of hampered us for quite a while. And you could say, no, you can't. I'm being wishy-washy because I don't want to offend anybody, but there's nothing you can do. I apologize. There's nothing you can do. So if you're offended, listen next week because we probably won't offend you nearly as much then. This whole idea of God goes as far as this episode of Star Trek is concerned. I am not, and I don't know what it is, but I'm not willing to say there's no God. I'm not willing to say that there is either. Because what do I know? The idea though of being bound by we're going to worship, we're going to do what some God says. It just seems silly, and that is, I think, what this episode is saying. The argument that you have as far as, Kirk saying to Carolyn, take my hand, this is what we have. That's a very compelling argument. I mean, we don't get into polytheism in this episode. We don't get into the kinds of fights that we had in the Crusades and then flash forward, however many hundreds of years later that we are still having today. As far as, well, your God's dumb and my God's awesome. I mean, we don't even get into that. I mean, they're just saying, enough with this. Here's what we have. We got you and me, and we're going to the stars. Yeah. And so and that's not a succinct message. Try putting that on a T-shirt or a bumper sticker. But I mean, that really seems to be what it is. We can, by being free of that and, relying on each other, like people on the planet, humanity relying on humanity rather than humanity relying on religion. Yeah. We're going to get further. We're going to go further.
It's to date, it is the most humanistic message that we've gotten from Star Trek. And that line, that exchange between Kirk and Carolyn reminded me, you may have seen it, and I would recommend to people to look it up if they have not seen it. Lawrence Krauss, the physicist, he wrote the physics of Star Trek, and he just came out with a book called A Universe from Nothing. He's done this bit before, and Neil deGrasse Tyson has done this bit before, where they say, look at your left hand, look at your right hand, the very atoms that make up your left hand and your right hand were forged in the heart of a star that exploded. And those atoms probably came from different stars in different places billions of years ago. And that is the thing that connects us to each other and connects us to the universe. And it's kind of an interesting humanistic spiritual message. If there is such a thing. I'm saying there's such a thing. I just did it. So I do think that is a message of this show. Like I said, a message of positive intent of this show. The other part of the message here that you got into that I agree with is that when we look at this show, Apollo is a stand-in for religion, not just Greek religion. And we're exploring that relationship between mankind and God. That's the thing that we're questioning here. What do we need of that? What do we get of it? And where do we go and what do we do when we get out of that? It's really bold stuff. And another quotation that came to mind while watching this episode is Thomas Jefferson in a letter that he wrote to his nephew. I believe it was in 1787, I want to say. He said, "Question with boldness even the existence of God. Because if there be one, he must more approve of the homage of reason than that of blindfolded fear." I love that quote. And I thought of that instantly when watching this episode. So, Ken, does the message hold up?
Whatever, dude. Yes.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Yes, the message holds up. Yes. Send your letters to missionlog at Roddenberry.com. Is that right? Is that our email address?
Yeah, missionlog@roddenberry.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Skype, and Twitter, all at the handle missionlogpod. You can even call us at 323-522-5641. And don't forget, we have a lovely homepage, missionlogpodcast.com. We've been putting up some documents from the archive there, so don't miss that. And remember, we may use your comments in an upcoming episode of Mission Log. What do we have next week, Ken?
Well, John, I think we all know if television of old has taught us anything, when it's time to change, you've got to rearrange. And we may find out more about that next week with The Changeling.
Some of the music for the mission log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com, and from the album Messages by Key Theory, free to download at kitheory.com. There's one thing I wish John and Ken had addressed. Apollo is an oiled and tan muscle man, so why was his space hand green? End transmission.
Now leaving Nerdist.com.